Hello, hello. I'm Nikaya. Mm, Introductions still feel awkward, but we're going to work with that. I have been having a lot of fun, actually. I really love video. Um, I really love video, and I've started recording more frequently again. In this last video on asking the question, "Are you Indigenous?" got a lot of attention, and I'm so curious about that. Was surprised, even though the topic is a highly charged topic. People have a lot to say about it, for those people who have anything to say about it. So, one of the questions that I had when I saw the number of people who had tapped into that recording was, what were you searching for? You know, when you see the question, "Are you Indigenous?" What was the thing inside you that said, "I want to hear what this is"? And what I'm wondering is, were people looking for someone else to say, "Yes, you are Indigenous," or "No, you are not Indigenous"? Um, that's the thing, that the question, the like motivator that comes to mind for me. I'm curious to know what people thought they would find in that video. In this moment, it's still not my intention to tell someone what they are or what they are not. In other words, I don't have the answer to that question for you. I do have strong opinions about it, and opinions based on my academic learning, based on my learning as a healing arts practitioner, which is where the majority of my learning in life has come from, and on my own experiences in my own life with the conditions and circumstances that have come together to make me who I am. From that framework, I have a lot of very clear and strong messages that I would like to share. And I was going to talk about why I'd like to share them, but I'd really like to stay focused on the the message that I'd like to just deliver through this video, and that is this idea of transmission. So, I don't know if I spoke about this in the previous video, in the Are You Indigenous video. So, if I didn't, um, please excuse me going back and maybe re-speaking it briefly. And I have so many conversations, so sometimes I do forget where and when. One of the things I asked, whether it was in the Are You Indigenous conversation or whether it was in a recording where I'm just speaking my ideas in preparation for the next conversation, we are in a culture, especially in the United States of America, um, we're in a culture that wants us to rush through information and rush through our conversations and rush through our relationships. So, an example of this for all of us is when we send a text message to someone. For many of us, it's our expectation that we're going to hear from them in a very abbreviated amount of time. For some of us, it's immediate. And if we don't get that immediate feedback, we're making up all sorts of stories about what that means. And that's a problem for communication, and it's an especial problem for deep, genuine communication. If it's a quick yes no, like, "Are you able to pick something up from the store?" Okay. But a lot of us are asking mm, a lot of us want deep conversation in our texts, but we're not actually showing up on the other side of that and facilitating that for ourselves. So I'm not going to go in that direction. What I want to stick to is, we are programmed in a lot of countries across the world. I'm just thinking of the people I know in other countries, to expect an immediate response, whether immediate for us means within seconds of, or immediate for us means within minutes or hours of. So now I'm going to this other part of the conversation that started this whole thing for me recently, with this question of who has permission to tap into a cultural lineage and learn information and then apply it to their life, apply it to their profession, apply it to their communities. Who has permission to tap in, and tap in where? I'm not going to get into that part of the conversation today, but I'm setting some framework here, because part of that conversation has to do with the way that information is delivered and transmitted. And specifically today, I want to talk about the transmission of the teacher to the student, or the teacher to the apprentice. And the reason why this feels relevant to me is because in these conversations about anyone's right to access information that is outside of their so-called cultural birthright, inside of that argument, I have noticed if someone is arguing against it, so if someone is concerned about cultural appropriation, or if someone is just straight up saying, if you're not whatever this is, if you're not in this category genetically of human beings, then you have no business over here in this world. One of the threads of that argument that I hear with people, whether or not they're directly or indirectly saying it, is that there will be no respect. There's no respect. People don't respect. And yes, that has been true in a lot of history. There has been a tremendous lack of respect from some groups to other groups. And that is a problem. And it has resulted in murder. It has resulted in all of us losing information about human health and wellness. And I am speaking of the physical health and wellness, but to me, in the way that I experience life, more importantly, our spiritual, energetic health and wellness. So anytime one group has come into another group and wiped away a language, wiped away spiritual practices, wiped away relationship with the land, which is what I was talking about in the first video. Whenever that has happened, it's happened a lot. And people who speak to that damage and harm, they're speaking to something true and real. It is also true that there are people in the world who are called to a culture, called to a tradition, called to a teacher in a culture and tradition, that the student, the apprentice, the novice, doesn't have a visible genetic connection with, but they have a cellular connection. And it is important that we recognize and respect the cellular drive, the genetic drive, the non-visible intelligence that is moving a person, whether it's you or someone else, towards something that you don't look like you belong to, but something in you recognizes as yours. And when I use the word yours in this moment, I'm not talking about grasping and claiming it. I'm talking about an invitation that the non-verbal life that we are in, we are all constantly being offered invitations that are a vibrational match for our current life and the life that we have the capacity to bring into form. When we are drawn to a teacher in a tradition, we are receiving a transmission. And there's the intellectual, physical transmission that we can recognize. There's the how-to list. This is how you do something. This is the vocabulary of the thing. This is the external way of intellectually engaging this thing. There's that relationship with it when we're learning. In my experience, and in my lifetime of witnessing other people who are students of a tradition and a teaching, when we sit with a teacher who is speaking and telling stories and making story connections with what we're learning, there is a transmission that is happening. So this body that has brought us to this experience, regardless of the color of the body, regardless, the body understands. Our body has a wisdom that our brain cannot even come close to. Our brain can only do so much. Our brain can only take in so much information and make sense of so much. This body has an entirely different understanding, and it is a much broader understanding. This body is, there's so many ways to talk about the body, but one of the ways that at times is useful to me is it's an antenna, a receiver. And we are constantly picking up on information, and we do not always know and don't often know what that information is about until we step into it. This conversation around proprietary human knowledge, aka cultural appropriation, aka you can't play in my sandbox because you don't look like me. There are transmissions that are happening through these teachings. And from where I've been in the world and exposed to the teachers that I've had and the colleagues that I've had, my perspective on this is that none of us have the right to tell another soul what they have the right to pursue. None of us have that right. Now, the personality, there's etiquette. And when it comes to sitting with a teacher, if someone is actually studying with a teacher, and again, this is where layers come in, because there are people who do not sit with another teacher, and they will pull information from books and put things together, and perhaps not, it has or does not have the richness and the depth that sitting with a teacher of that tradition can give to us. I'm not talking about pulling the information off of a shelf and implementing it. I am talking about being called to something, not looking like we deserve the call, and that's other people's projections onto us. That's other people's decision that who we are to them on the outside means that we shouldn't be able to, with the enthusiasm of a child, sit in front of a teacher and learn something that our soul and our spirit has said, this is for you. Come explore this. So when we sit in front of a teacher, we're receiving transmission. There's the vibrational, energetic transmission of that person and the entire lineage that they carry. This is one of the reasons why I encourage people to go be with a teacher. Like, I love books and I love libraries, and I spend a lot of time with books and libraries. I love that experience. And every time I've stepped into the container of a teacher with a teaching, all of me is spoken to, and more of me gets activated in that experience. And a part of that activation is an inherent love, devotion, and respect for the teaching that's being communicated to me. So I'm going to close this out. We're at 15 minutes, and I do like to condense this for you. I want to share a story with you that came to mind while I was having this conversation about teachers and transmission. So I love dance and have always loved dance of all kinds. And a few years ago, I got introduced to something called kizomba, which is a beautiful dance. And I really got sucked into it. This was before 2020. Got so sucked into it. I went to the festivals. I took as many classes as I could. And early on, I learned that kizomba comes out of a dance called Simba. And I love Simba, which I did not know. But what is relevant to this conversation here is that I had a teacher, David. I think his name was David Campos. And David loves kizomba and Simba, and he's a good teacher. And he loves it so much that he learned the history of this dance and chose to teach the history of this dance. And I love to know where things come from. Like, what's the lineage? What's the story of this thing? So he presented a history class at one of these weekend festivals. And what I'm going to say to you is Simba and kizomba, they're Angolan dances. I'm not Angolan, and David is not Angolan. And yet this man was introduced to a style of dance, very African, and then got Europeanized, and there's a whole history. There is a reason for that goes beyond these ideas that we have about that we'll get into because they're part of the conversation. His love and devotion for a dance that didn't come out of his physical genetics, but came out of his cellular memory and his cellular resonance, his cellular family, makes him like one of the most passionate, humble teachers that I've come across in that field, teaching the history of why we listen to this music, what these steps are about, what people were going through that led them to create this dance, and how this dance evolved into this dance, and how the revolution was a part of that, like a significant part of that, which just as a student gave me a sense of lineage and dropped me deeper into the practice of that dance for the time that I was studying it. We have got to liberate ourselves from these ideas that because we look a certain way, there's only a certain kind of information that's available to us. That is my message, whether you listen to another video or not on this conversation. There is a need for us to be respectful to one another, but to automatically assume that just because someone doesn't look a certain way, they're not going to have the capacity for respect is just the dumbest. It's the dumbest of the dumbs. Now, we may have had personal experience where we came across someone who was not respectful. That does not mean an entire group of people are going to follow in that way of being, that way of showing up. So my reason for putting this conversation out in a broader place is because I am seeing too many women in particular from this part of the world who are feeling like they cannot pursue the teachings that are calling to them from an internal place. And we need to have conversations about this that include everyone in the human family, because whether you like it or not, we're all here together. And when we exclude a group of people from indigenousness, their own indigenousness, their own capacity for relationship with the land and the earth that we live on, when we exclude a group of people from that, when we exclude a group of people from deep spiritual practices, I'm not talking about the religious, although we can bring it in later, but that's not what I mean when I'm talking about spiritual practices. I'm talking about that you and God, you and your creator. When we say that this group of people can have access to that relationship, but this group of people can't, we are doing damage to all of us. Right now, with the way that everything is shifting and everyone is shifting, we need all of us to be able to come back into good relationship with our lives. I will say with our lives, to keep it out of the overly generalized life. We need everyone to know that they have a place in this home of connectivity and community and the village concept. Everyone has a genetic lineage, and many of us have multiple genetic lineages. And for anyone to feel like they have the right to externally identify and qualify someone else for what their soul, what their spirit, what their DNA is calling them towards, that's an arrogance that we cannot afford to continue indulging in on this planet. I will stop it there. Until next time, folks.